What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're going to be discussing what went wrong with the UFC 300 main event. So as you guys know, Dana White and the UFC announced Alex Pereira versus Jamal Hill for the UFC Light Heavyweight Championship, and that was after the UFC 298 post-fight presser, and people are absolutely infuriated with this fight. People hate this fight and hate that it's headlining UFC 300. So let's discuss what went wrong with the main event for the biggest card in the UFC's history. So Alex Pereira came out today. I saw it on Instagram, quoted by him. I'm going to summarize what he said. He said, Jamal Hill versus Alex Pereira, was originally scheduled for UFC 301 in Brazil. But then a few days ago, Alex Pereira got a call and it was like, and the UFC was like, oh, could you headline UFC 300? Alex Pereira is like, oh, great opportunity. I'm going to jump on it. And here we have Alex Pereira versus Jamal Hill for UFC 300. But that begs the question, less than 2 months out of your biggest card ever, why are you calling Alex Pereira, who's scheduled for 301, to come headline 300? That means your original top priority, top choice will not be there. UFC 300, the top choice for the UFC, is not going to happen. So let's discuss what those top choices were. What were the priorities for the UFC? So in that UFC 298 post-fight presser, Dana White seemed very infuriated that one guy did not accept a fight to be on 300. Go back, watch the interview. There was somebody he was mad at. He also brought up that Leon Edwards was offered 3 opponents, and it was later informed to us by Ariel Helwani that those 3 opponents were Leon Edwards versus Islam Makhachev, Khamzat Chimaev, and Shavkat Rakhmonov. Now, my question to you guys is, why is the UFC asking these Muslim fighters to headline 300 when there's Ramadan and they clearly don't want to fight? Because Khamzat doesn't want to fight. Islam said, I don't think he wants to fight. And I don't want to speculate. I'm not sure if Shavkat is Muslim. I do not want to speculate on that. But it also came out from Ariel Helwani that the first choice was Leon versus Chimaev. Leon Edwards versus Khamzat Chimaev at 170 pounds. Why is the UFC putting the biggest card ever on the shoulders of Khamzat Chimaev to make 170 pounds during Ramadan? I mean, what is the UFC's thought process behind that? Because clearly I am missing something. Because last time Khamzat Chimaev tried to fight at 170 pounds, he missed by, 8 pounds? And now you want to put UFC 300 on his shoulders? It simply doesn't make sense to me. So I think the UFC wanted one of those fights to happen out of those 3 top choices. Those clearly are not happening. Also, why wasn't Belal Muhammad offered one of those title shots? I mean, that's absolutely ridiculous. It's embarrassing from the UFC. Belal Muhammad is the clear number 1 contender in the welterweight division, and he's not getting a title shot. It's simply embarrassing for me. He wasn't even offered one. So you're telling me he's at best the 4th best contender at welterweight? It's simply ridiculous. Belal needs his title shot. Why not put it as the co-main for UFC 300? You know, you have Pereira versus Hill as the main event. Throw Edwards versus Muhammad as the co-main event that make the card. That would make the card so much better, in my opinion. I love that fight. I want to see that fight. It's the best versus the best. We got to see that fight happen. Also, I think the UFC, another one of their top choices were Israel Adesanya versus Dricus du Plessis. And I think Dana White is mad at Dricus du Plessis for not accepting this fight. I think the UFC would have been happy with those 4 fights. Those Leon fights and that Israel Adesanya fight. And I think it's clear that Dricus du Plessis declined the fight. Dana White was mad at somebody, and I think it's Dricus. Dricus declined to fight Izzy the first time at 290... 293? Was that Strickland versus Adesanya? He declined there, and I think he declined now. So I don't think Dana White was very happy at Dricus. Also, on Adesanya's Instagram story a few days ago, he posted something to the likes of, I'm always ready next time, or I'm ready for the next time, something like that, where he's pretty much emphasizing that he was ready to headline UFC 300, but maybe somebody else wasn't. So I think the UFC couldn't get any of those Leon Edwards fights together. They thought, okay, we could do Adesanya versus Du Plessis. Du Plessis declined. Dana White's mad. Israel Adesanya was ready. That fight should have happened, but it's not. So now we're stuck with rescheduling a fight that was supposed to happen at 301 and now putting it on 300 less than 2 months away. And I've said it for a while. The UFC should have had this fight done, this main event fight done, for 6 months. This is the biggest card ever. Have this fight done, planned. Have it done. Say it's Leon versus Islam. Say you somehow make that fight happen. Islam fights during Ramadan. Make that fight done a while ago. Why are we scrambling? I mean, that's so unprofessional from the UFC and Dana White. This fight should have been done. So it's embarrassing, man. So now we're gonna get UFC 300, Pereira versus Jamal Hill. Pereira said he wants to defend his title at UFC 301 in Brazil. That would be 21 days. That would break the record for the most back-to-back title wins. That would break the record of Ronda Rousey. Ronda Rousey had that record 56 days between 168 and 170. Pereira would do it in 21 days. I don't think he'll be ready. So I think we're going to get Alex Pereira versus Jamal Hill for 300. UFC 301 in Brazil, we're going to get Alessandro Pantoja versus somebody. Right? Alessandro Pantoja versus somebody. I was like listening because there was something outside my door. That seems just very terrible, right? In the perfect world, we get Pereira versus Jamal Hill at 301, and then on 300, we have Leon versus Islam. In a perfect world. But we're just not going to get that. And then maybe the 301 headline, or co-main event, is Alessandro Pantoja, say, versus a Manel Kape. So I think the UFC completely fumbled this main event. However, I still think it's a very good card. People are hating on the card entirely, saying UFC 299 is better. That's simply ridiculous. I still think the UFC 300 card is probably the best we've ever seen. I mean, we have guys like Charles Oliveira, Aljamain Sterling, Yuri Prochazka, and those guys aren't even the featured fight on the main card. I mean, that's simply ridiculous, but I think the high expectations that Dana White and the UFC were setting made people kind of freak out. Because for months and for weeks, Dana White was like, you can make a documentary about this main event. Oh, the stuff we've done to get this main event done, it's crazy. The stuff behind the scenes, it's absolutely insane. And then he announces Pereira versus Jamal Hill. Will I say after the UFC 298 post-fight presser? Say this fight was Leon Edwards versus Islam Makhachev. I guarantee you that Dana White and the UFC announced this fight on a separate day, a few days after 298. Say they announce it on a Thursday. Leon Edwards versus Islam Makhachev, UFC 300 main event. It's an absolute mega fight. But they did it after 298. Why is that? They want Topuria to steal the headline, so they kind of slipped that 300 main event under the rug. Because Topuria KOs Volkanovski, that's going to be the headliner. And then it's UFC 300 Pereira versus Hill. Because Dana White doesn't want to show people that this is the main event for 300. Or not, I wouldn't say show, but you know what I mean. He kind of wants to just hide it under 298. So overall, I think the UFC completely fumbled this main event. Pereira versus Hill, it's a great fight. I love it, but it was not what the UFC wanted. Let me know what you think. Subscribe, like, follow TikTok. Let's go.